You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the capitalist corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the capitalist corner.
Welcome, everybody, to this special Saturday edition of the Capitalist Corner. We're going to be doing these now, I guess, every Saturday, but probably not at this exact time. We're going to sort that out. And we are going to have more philosophically inclined discussions on Saturday. Today, we're going to be discussing critics to individual rights. We still get super chats. We still get super stickers. We still love them both. We've got a lot of information going on, and I'm going to let Persephone explain that all to you. New name to the channel, etc., etc. Go ahead, Persephone.
So, because there are now so many shows happening on this channel, the Capitalist Corner, discussing the news, everyday ethics, discussing everyday ethics and crime corrections and culture, discussing you'll never guess crime corrections and culture, as well as this new Saturday show, we're moving away from the name The Capitalist Corner, and you'll see the channel is now called The Rational Alternative. So don't be alarmed.
This show is still The Capitalist Corner.
Yes, the Capitalist Corner is still happening. That's every day, noon or 9 a.m.
noon
or
Eastern time,
6
9
p.m. or 6 p.m. if you're in, Europe or South Africa. And everyday ethics is still happening. Crime corrections and culture is still happening. Don't be alarmed. It's just so that the name of the channel more accurately portrays what the different shows are. Also, please don't forget to go and follow us on Twitch. And find all of the different shows on Spotify. You will also notice that there is now YouTube memberships. So we will be doing additional shows on the channel for members specifically. And also there will be members only shorts, members only live streams, and members only videos when there are sort of extra discussions that happen. And that's it, I think.
That is it. So, and please remember, super chats, super stickers, very appreciated. And go ahead, Persephone, break it down. You've got the questions, you've got the objections, you've got it all.
Okay, so today we are discussing individual rights and objections to individual rights. And you sent me a bit of information. Well, objections to the objectivist view of individual rights.
Well, just to be clear, I sent you a bunch of articles and writings about objections to the very concept of individual rights. I then asked AI to specifically address questions to the objectivist view of individual rights, coming as if they were coming from the standard critics or the normal critics of the concept. So you have both critics of natural rights per se, and specific questions I gave you that are directed toward objectivist view.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're going to do with all the information, so now the onus is on you now to put it all together.
Now I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and I'm going to ask you to explain all of the stuff that you sent me. Before we do this, I do just want to say you did send me some information or some sort of stuff about Karl Marx, and I'm really struggling with myself right now to not derail this discussion entirely to discuss something unrelated. So just know that I'm fighting an internal battle.
I will rein you in.
Okay, so do you first want to talk about the idea? Alt-tabbed, I shouldn't have done that. Do you want to talk first about the concept of natural rights and how objectivism views rights?
Sure. So the concept of natural rights is very much connected to the concept of natural law. It has a very long history. that doesn't neatly sort of situate itself. For instance, the ancient sophists were the first to really point out that what the law is as opposed to what the law should be is not the same thing. Plato, I believe, came along and he said that the law is just. Aristotle, I think, kind of followed with him. With the Stoics, you ended up with an idea of a natural law, that the law should be based on. Once you get up to, say, I don't know, the 1500s with philosophers like Hugo Grosz or Grotius, I don't know, Hugo Grote, I don't really know how to pronounce it. You start to get an idea of natural rights. John Locke is probably the first most famous person to put forward an idea of natural rights, that we have a right to life, liberty, and property. That, of course, was largely adopted by the founding fathers, cemented for eternity in the Declaration of Independence. Frederick Bastiat had an idea of natural rights. Thomas Paine had an idea of natural rights. Two revolutions, the American Revolution and the French Revolution, were both largely based on the idea of natural rights. And ultimately, Ayn Rand came across, and she doesn't really use the term natural rights anywhere that I'm familiar with. And there is debate about whether her theory fits in the natural rights tradition. I'm in the camp that says it does, although she uses individual rights. But she is the first philosopher that I'm aware of that actually tied the idea of individual rights to a broader theory of morality, which the theory of individual rights absolutely needs, because right itself is a moral concept.
Yeah.
Do you want me to elaborate more, or do you want to ask a question?
No, you can elaborate.
Okay, so in objectivism, objectivist ethics is an egoistic ethic. And with that, you have the fundamental values, reason, purpose, self-esteem, and then you have the virtues of productivity, honesty, integrity, justice, independence, and pride. And then, of course, the idea that the initiation of force is evil. And then you have the social concept of right, meaning it's a right to action. A right is the freedom of action in a social context, meaning that nobody else can rightfully stop you from engaging it. Now, historically, the definition of rights in this context, it doesn't conflict with Ayn Rand's definition by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it gives a better clue as to what we're talking about. It's a moral claim to something, or a just claim to something. The reason I tend to prefer those to Rand's definition, there's two reasons really. One is it has a long history. So you're not coming out with a new definition of a word. You're talking about the exact same concept that goes back hundreds of years. And the other, because it explicitly brings in the moral component of a moral claim or a just claim. But, I mean, one does have a moral claim to freedom of action in social circumstances. So there's no conflict there. In my own analysis, and this is not objectivism, when I've tried to really boil it down to, if we have the concept of the initiation of force is wrong, what does the concept of right tell us? Well, if the initiation of force is wrong, the concept of right tells us when using force is appropriate. Meaning, if somebody tries to stop me physically from performing an action that person is not morally justified in stopping me from doing, I have the right to use force. I have a moral claim to self-defense. Okay.
Well, this was a weird one for me, because this is not something that I've ever. This is not something that I've given like over much thought to, the whole concept of any of this. So as part of the stuff that you sent me the biggest critics of this idea of natural rights.
Right.
And one of those was Jeremy Bentham, who, and I love this, called it nonsense upon stilts. Do you...
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So real quickly, just so everybody knows, Jeremy Bentham, when he mentioned nonsense on stilts, it's in an essay he wrote called Anarchic Fallacies. And it's addressed predominantly against the French Revolution and the ideas that were incorporated in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, I believe is what it's called. So that's the context. So he's not talking about Ayn Rand's elucidation of the concept. He's talking about the people that have put it forth up to that time: John Locke, Thomas Paine, and of course the French politicians who put forward the Marquis de Lafayette, Thomas Jefferson, etc.
Yeah, so he rejects the idea that rights are something that exist naturally. They're given to you by law or an institution, which I can kind of see, but also not really, because it vaguely makes sense to me. But if they talk about on a desert island, if you're on a desert island and you have something and someone takes it from you, you've still been wronged. They're still violating your rights. Therefore,
well, not according to Bentham. No, Akira Felix. I just want to Akira Felix. No, Edmund Burke specifically responded to Thomas Paine, The Rights of Man. In anarchic fallacies, Bentham is not specifically responding to Thomas Paine.
No, so Bentham said that rights only exist if they are established and enforced by a legal system.
Yes.
So if there's no law, there's no rights, which to me doesn't make sense.
Okay, so that's true. That's his view. So
yeah, it is. I'm just saying it doesn't to me make sense. So he thought that appeals to natural rights encourage people to reject legitimate government based on abstract claims.
Right, because what ends up happening, and this is a solid critique against a rationalistic kind of rights, right? The rationalism of, say, a Rousseau or even Thomas Paine when he writes The Rights of Man. What can happen is people become convinced that they've got these absolute rights, and they are willing to die for them. And oftentimes they end up conflicting. One group says they have this rights, this person has this rights, and so you just keep overthrowing governments. And we saw that play out in the French Revolution with the multiple. I mean, they started off with they had the French, the constitutional monarchy, the French Republic, and ultimately on to the Directorate. So there was a lot of problems, to say the least, with the concept of natural rights that was implemented during or attempted to be implemented during the French Revolution.
So he didn't just think that natural rights were wrong. He thought that they were actually dangerous.
Yes.
The concept was dangerous.
Edmund Burke did as well. We're not going to cover Edmund Burke, but Edmund Burke thought the very same thing, and many other critics of natural rights did too.
Yeah, so we're covering, just so that we know the structure of what we're covering. We're covering Jeremy Bentham, Karl Marx, Mises, and I think Thomas Hill Green,
and John Dewey.
Yes. Oh, I need to open that. So we're just going to discuss their criticisms, and then we're going to go into some questions.
Okay, that's what I'm hoping. That's what I want you to do is to frame them in question form.
But I mean, I just want to explain.
Okay.
I just want to, because I'm not sure. Does everybody know all of these things? So let's just go through.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's just go through. Let's talk about Karl Marx so we can get it out of the way.
Okay.
Fighting myself. Okay, so Karl Marx's idea, he also rejects the idea of natural rights, because he says that they're products of specific social and economic systems created by the bourgeois society. Please, you talk about this, because I'm just gonna get annoyed.
Okay, so basically, I wanted you to frame these things as questions. You insisted that we actually talk about them, and now you're going to say you're not going to talk about them, but I am. Got it.
You know these things. Well, you know these things.
But okay, so Karl Marx, shouldn't be surprised, basically said that the idea of natural rights is a tool of the bourgeois to establish the given social order of property rights in individual action. He says that it's based on mythology, that individuals are atomistic and not embedded in a social system or a product of social system. And basically just says it's a rationalization for people to keep what they have. That's the simplest way that I can put it. So he says that they're both mistaken and really a dishonest contrivance of people who wanted to maintain the status quo.
Yeah, and that rights don't overcome social division. They presuppose it. It's reflecting the values and needs of a capitalist society.
Yes.
So that's what he said. And he also said that they're not just wrong, they're actively problematic. They protect existing inequalities, they legitimize exploitation.
Yes.
Etc., etc. Then there was Mises, who also he didn't disagree the same way that the others did. He just came at it from a different angle.
No, Mises is in essence a utilitarian economist who's a classical liberal advocating for capitalism. So he would support the same types of laws, for instance, that Ayn Rand supported, the same type of system. He just would ground it in economic arguments and not in the types of arguments that she did in terms of individual rights. He's a subjective moralist. He doesn't believe in objective morality, so therefore he doesn't believe in objective rights.
Sorry, I'm just asking Christopher Smith who he's talking about specifically.
He's talking about Karl Marx. Go ahead.
Oh, gross. Okay. So then John Dewey. I'm going to talk about John Dewey, and then we'll get to the questions.
John Dewey is another one who does not believe in objective morality. He thinks that morality evolves and it changes given the time and circumstances to fill whatever needs that the society at the time is facing. That there's no objective standard to point to. He's critical of the idea of natural rights. Similarly, that it's too atomistic. Also, that it can override democracy because he thinks democracy is a good thing.
So we've got questions, but I have a question for you. Why, if you had to give motivation on why you think that the objectivist view of individual rights or natural rights is the correct one, what would you say?
Because the idea of rights is a moral concept, and objectivism is, for starters, I mean, the reason I say it's, first of all, it's why I think it's superior to the rest is the first thing is it links it to an objective theory of morality. So to have a concept of right, to have a moral claim to something or a just claim, you need to have a morality. You need to have a standard of justice. Otherwise, you can't have a just claim. So that's the first piece right there tells me why it's preferable to the other theories of natural rights. That doesn't answer, though, that it's correct. To do that, you have to tie the theory of rights back to the theory of egoism. So in egoism, of course, it's ethical for me to act in my own self-interest. The standard of value in objectivism is the life of the individual. That's the standard that he operates from. It's based on the idea that human beings are entities of volitional, conceptual consciousness. We have free will, the faculty of reason, and we have to discover what's good for us. Reason is one of the fundamental values: reason, purpose, and self-esteem. One of the necessities for reason to function is that I be free to do so. Right? So, and then, of course, you go through the values and virtues. We already discussed them. So, in order to survive, I need to be able to accumulate property. I need to be able to, exercise. In order to be happy, to thrive, I need to be able to choose my values. All that requires freedom. Then you have to say, I can't initiate force against anybody else. That's that's an evil thing to do. That's an immoral thing to do because ultimately it's not in my interest to do so for a variety of reasons that we've already discussed in other, other contexts. I don't want to get too bogged down in that. And then you have to ask, okay, do I have a moral and ethical claim to my freedom? Well, if it's ethical for me to take actions that require freedom, then I would have to have an ethical claim to take those actions. But that doesn't just mean I can take ethical actions because freedom is the precondition. So I have to be able to have freedom of will to make my choices. Nobody else is ethical in attacking me or physically stopping me from making choices that aren't, and I'm not initiating force against anybody else. I would absolutely be correct in using force if somebody were to use force against me to take these things. Why? Because I have a moral claim to these things. I am just in defending what is mine because it is in my interest to do so.
Okay. Of all of these people, is Rand's view of rights not one of the only ones that doesn't sort of rely on some type of coercion at the end of the day?
I don't know what you mean. Frederick
Well,
Bastiat's theory of rights doesn't rely on coercion. No.
Of the ones that we're talking about, Bentham, Marx.
Well, they don't have theory, but they do.
No.
But here's the problem. Okay, so but that doesn't make it superior. You can't use that as an argument for her theory of rights because you have to demonstrate that coercion is wrong.
True. Okay. Do you want to answer Greg's question?
There's a huge distinction between Mises and Rothbard. Rothbard got the idea of natural rights, the natural rights tradition from Ayn Rand, and he largely used her theory of rights, but in a far more rationalistic sense without giving her credit. But so, yes, there's a big distinction. Rothbard's is a moral argument, and he explicitly says so, whereas Mises's is not.
Okay. So now we're going to go through questions from the angle of Bentham and Marx, Dewey, Mises, and Green.
Okay.
Okay. So
we didn't cover Thomas Hill Green, and I got to tell you, I don't remember his specific arguments against rights.
Hold on, I do.
I know that he's very prominent among rights critics. To be honest, I never heard of this guy until a week ago. Also, there's Alistair McIntyre,
whose name is spelt really weirdly. Okay, I don't know where it is.
Okay, we could just dive into the questions.
Okay, so from arguing from Bentham's point of view, calling something a right sounds authoritative, but isn't it just policy preference dressed up in sort of fancy language? If a right produces no measurable benefit for human welfare, what is it actually doing?
Okay, so in Bentham's question, Bentham is assuming that his utilitarianism is correct. That's first. That human welfare, broadly speaking, the greatest happiness for the greatest number is the correct measurement, which he never proves. So that's the first problem. Secondly, the idea that rights don't produce human flourishing, yeah, they do. The whole idea is that human beings require freedom in order to flourish. They require being able to act on their own conscience. They require being able to accumulate property and trade property. So you have a right to do all those things. So to say that that doesn't lead to human flourishing is just garbage. He does go on to say, well, if you don't have a government to enforce it, it doesn't matter. Well, that's fine and dandy, but that's the whole point, is that you need an ethical base, a proper base upon which to form government. So if you're asking how should government be formed, well, the purpose of the government ought to be to defend individual rights. And of course, the fact that rights are not secure without the government is the whole reason that you want the government.
That's true. So the further question is, if no one is enforcing your rights, then do you really have them? Are you dressing up a legal conclusion as a biological or as a fact?
Well, yeah, you do have them, but that's the point, is that you want them to be enforced. Because otherwise you're saying, okay, let's flip this on Bentham. If you're going to pass laws, what are they enforcing if not rights? Arbitrary whims, the claims that Bentham makes. The point is you want those laws, you want the state to protect those rights.
So if individual rights are absolute rather than subject to the utilitarian calculus, if respecting one's person's property rights causes demonstrably greater aggregate suffering than violating it, the objectivist has no non-circular answer that doesn't smuggle in prior commitment to the individual as the unit of moral analysis.
So what? What he just did in that question is smuggle in utilitarianism as the standard by saying it's going to cause greater harm to a greater amount of people, which the whole point of objectivism is to argue that individuals are ends in themselves, right? But the broader point is every individual is presumed to have these rights. So they have the same rights. They're all protected. The idea is not going to cause that type of harm. But that's just the only thing is that's not the standard. What if you had, for instance, let me give a ridiculous hypothetical, even though I generally hate them. If you had a system, if you had a culture where only say 15% of the people were rational, but yet you had a system designed to protect their rights, the people that are going to not thrive under this, it's not because of the individual rights. It's because of the fact that they're not rational, that they're not trying, they're not working, they're not being productive. So, of course, then you're going to say, well, look, these rights that didn't benefit them, but it's only because they're not acting in accordance with the idea of individual rights, with reason. Are those the people that law should be protecting, or should it be protecting the people who are actually doing good?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. But that's the thing. Like all of them come in assuming that that their view is the one that is correct.
Sure.
So the principle that rights impose only negative obligations is a policy choice, is in itself a policy choice with welfare consequences. When the consequences of strict non-interference produce mass misery. No, already covered this.
But let's cover that. I want to cover one part of that.
Yes.
People will say, well, why do rights impose obligations? Who says they do? That assumes, so the argument that a lot of people make, and I've made it a lot, myself before I really got into thinking about the topic, is I don't not initiate force against people because they have rights. It isn't wrong to initiate force against people because they have rights. It's wrong to initiate force because it's against my interest to do so. That's why it's wrong. What right says is if I do initiate force, that person is morally justified in responding in kind. So when we put in a government and we say it's protecting rights, what we're saying is it's exercising the right of individuals and doing so on a collectivized basis to self-defense, right? It's not that the right a person has puts a positive claim on somebody else or even a negative claim. That claim is already there pre-rights. You're not supposed to be putting your hands on other people. You're not supposed to be violating them. But they have a claim to their stuff and they have a claim to defend it. They have a right to defend it.
Yeah. Okay, now we're gonna get into Marx, and this is where I might get distracted.
Okay, try not to.
Okay, so the objectivist idea, Ayn Rand's idea of rights, treats the worker and the employer, so the laborer who owns his own labor power and the capitalist who owns the means of production, as legal equals. But does that not have does that not hide a massive difference in equality of power? And doesn't
No,
it call it natural?
no, it doesn't. First, no, it doesn't hide anything. Um, you're, because first of all, the people that are laborers can save their stuff. They can accumulate capital and become capitalists themselves if they're willing to take the risk to do so. Assuming that the person that's the capitalist did not steal his stuff, it's justly earned. Or why should everybody be equal economically? There's no reason if that would be the case. So no, it doesn't ignore anything. And again, the question assumes that there's something insidious about having economic inequality. It's also the case that somebody who's an employee may just not want to be a capitalist, might not want to be a boss or a business owner. They've made other decisions in their life, more time off, time with the family, time with the friends, to go to ball games, whatever.
Yeah. My whole issue with his theory, right, is that it can only work if you presuppose the idea that capitalism existed first. It's what's that word? Parasitic. There we go. That was hard to say. On the idea that capitalism existed first, because if there is nothing to seize, then what can you do? You have to, like, the wage and labor system has to exist already for you to identify who's been exploited. The capital has to exist for you to seize it. And if those things don't exist, then you get what? What do you get? You're seizing something. You're seizing subsistence farms, and you're
I don't know what
destroying.
you're talking about, Persephone. I'm sorry.
What? How? What do you mean you don't understand what I'm talking
I mean,
about?
it's not clear to me what you're talking about. I don't know what you're saying.
Do you not think that in order for his idea of seizing the means of production and seizing this power back, do you not think that for that to happen, that those things already have to exist? That
Yeah, but that's his
capitalism.
whole theory.
Yeah, but it doesn't. But what do you like? If that didn't exist,
Then he
to
would
me
have
that
no
does-
theory.
yeah, okay.
His theory is that it goes in phases. That there's a dialectic by which different modes of production replace the previous one. So mercantilism replaces feudalism, capitalism replaces mercantilism, and then ultimately socialism, communism will replace capitalism. So yes, it's true that it has to exist first, but that's fundamental to his theory.
But it's stupid, is what I'm saying.
Well, maybe, but the fact that it's stupid doesn't address the criticism of individual rights that we're talking about.
Oh, it was just me getting distracted.
Okay.
So
Stay
if
focused.
don't want to, it's a Saturday. I'm allowed to be a little bit. I'm allowed to be a little bit like off the rails today. So if productive capacity is always socially embedded, language, infrastructure, accumulated knowledge, legal order, all preceding the individual, on what principled basis do you attribute the full value of production to the individual rights holder rather than to the social conditions that made production possible?
Who puts full value of production to an individual rights holder? Nobody. So I don't even know what the question means because it's just not true.
I'm
Individuals under individual rights ought to be, not necessarily are, but probably tend to be rewarded based on the value that they produce. No, matter of fact, no. Individuals are in a free market rewarded based on the perceived value that they produce. So they're not responsible for the entire value. No individuals entitled to, or responsible for the entire value that's produced in an economy or for a business. But neither is the capitalist, neither is the entrepreneur, the banker, or anybody else.
Yeah, so I mean, the question is saying that because no one produces value alone, like everything that he produces makes use of what was produced before him, the infrastructure, the laws. Like, why does he get to claim individual ownership of stuff that he used other people's?
Because he has taken what existed and created something new. as the people previously did, and as the people previously did. They take what's given and make something new out of it. Presumably, if we're talking about a free society, those people were paid for their contributions, and this person should be paid for his or hers.
So the next question is that Rand claims that rights are grounded in an objective human nature, but which human nature? The alienated laborer of capitalism, the tribesman of antiquity, or some abstract rational animal? Isn't human nature always historically mediated, making any rights derived from it contingent rather than universal?
No. Expression of human nature, if we're talking about humans. Now, if you're going to say evolution, right, but then you're going to talk about something that's not human, right? The whole concept of change implies identity. Otherwise, what's changing? So the identity of humans, what is in human nature, is the same. Now, obviously, its expression changes based on culture, based on environment, but it's still the same human nature. The human means of survival ultimately is rooted in reason. Reason is the fundamental means of survival, right? Now, that gets better as time goes on. It becomes more applicable when people aren't bashing their skulls in everywhere. But that's a function of civilization. And that gets better with the respect for individual rights, by the way. So no, it's not human nature that's changing.
I mean, it's hard for me to argue with that because, I mean, I think this is...
No, you don't want to argue.
No, I know. I'm just saying there's very little for me to add or comment on because, yeah. Okay, so Dewey.
Cheatham and Howe?
What?
The famous law firm, Dewey, Cheatham and Howe.
Which is located where?
Oh, my God.
What?
Why do you guys do this to me? Persephone. It's a law firm. What are law firms known for? What are lawyers known for?
Practicing law.
Are they known for being ethical, honest folks?
Say it again.
Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
Okay. So I got there eventually. It's a Saturday and I'm tired. Okay. So now we're going just so that everybody on YouTube is aware, Michael keeps commenting on Twitch. And it's very distracting. He wants me to stop being distracted, but he's distracting me. Okay, so Rand treats reason as a faculty that operates in isolation, producing rights through introspection on human nature. Dewey would challenge that since concepts, including rights and human nature, are tools developed through social inquiry and revised in light of consequences, how can rights be fixed, context-independent entitlements rather than working hypotheses subject to revision?
Okay, so go. I want you to take this one slowly because there's a bunch in there that I want to. Okay. Okay. So go back to the very first part, and I'll just start reading, and I'll tell you when to stop because I want to address it.
Okay. So Rand treats reason as a faculty that operates in isolation.
Okay, that's not true. That's ridiculous. That would be base level rationalism that she explicitly rejects. Reason absolutely takes place in a context. That context is the reality as given. Reason can only work with sense impressions and perceptions. It doesn't work isolated from everything else. So he's already wrong. Okay, so go ahead. Keep reading.
Producing rights through introspection on human nature.
Okay, rights are not produced by introspection on human nature. Rights are induced, meaning they're learned. The concept of rights is learned by studying human nature, studying how human beings interact, studying the results, studying the requirements of a human life. Just figuring out what's moral and immoral. They're not produced from introspection. So that's wrong. Okay, go ahead.
So I just want to say, Greg says that's an incredible grab bag of subjectivism.
It
okay.
is. Remember, we like the super chats and the super stickers, folks. Okay, go ahead.
We do. Dewey would challenge, since concepts including rights and human nature are tools developed through social inquiry and revised
All right, stop. Okay. I don't know what the hell. What does he mean, social inquiry here? That doesn't say individuals think. Societies don't. There's no society inquiring. I can certainly learn from other people, but the thinking process, the concept development as it relates to my own mind is done on an individual basis. Okay, go ahead.
How can rights be fixed? Context independent entitlements.
Okay, stop. Again, who says that rights are context independent entitlements? Nobody. Rand never claims that nowhere. Everything exists in a context. Nothing is devoid of context. That would be just some kind of a void that you would live in. That's not reality. Also, as an entitlement, I don't even like the word because it acts as if it's something somebody else owes you rather than something you have a right to or are morally just in defending. Okay, go ahead.
Rather than working hypothesis subject to revision.
What would be the hypothesis? A hypothesis is basically, under these conditions, this happens. That's because Dewey's pragmatism is that that's how you know truth, is you try things out and see. But even if that were the case, when it's been tried out, we've seen that human freedom produces the best results.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what are your natural rights?
So I would say, based on the idea of egoism, the ethical case that we have, based on human requirements, I have a right, a moral claim. Whenever I say a right, think in terms of I would be ethical in using force if somebody initiated force against me to stop me from doing this thing. Okay? I have a right to think my own thoughts. Okay? I have a right to the base of morality. I have a moral claim to that which makes morality possible, my own life, right? I have a right to, because it's in my interest to stay alive. That's my standard. I have a right to take the actions necessary to do so without initiating force against others. I'm right in defending myself. Okay, so as a requirement of that, I need my liberty. I need freedom of choice and freedom of action. So if somebody tries to stop me from my thinking or my freedom of action, I have a right to defend that. Also, my life requires that I accumulate, that I translate or convert natural resources, etc., into some sort of property and sort of things that I can consume, things that can keep me warm, food, clothing, shelter, property. Right? So if I'm accumulating property, I have, and that's a necessity for me, I have a right to defend that. Therefore, I mean, at a very minimal level, to put it broadly, I guess it wouldn't be minimal, it'd be fundamental broadly, I have the right to life, freedom, and whatever property I can justly accumulate.
Can you imagine any case in which those natural rights would be context dependent?
What do you mean? They're all context dependent. So
how rights can be fixed context independent entitlements?
They can't be. Like, okay, so what happens if we are on the proverbial life raft?
Yeah.
Right? And now the boat is going down, right? There's no way that we can all survive. So the normal course of action, the normal applicable morality doesn't apply here. So how do we say rights? What would rights even mean in such a circumstance? When survival is all that matters and there's no way for me to survive except for throwing you off that boat. I'm not going to die, and I wouldn't be morally expected to uphold some abstraction world of forms idea of rights?
I would expect you to save my life on
No,
this
you're
raft.
done. You're gone.
No,
And
unfair.
And we might be looking at Megan going overboard as well.
Yeah, you have to use look your looky eyes. Would a human need rights on a desert island? Would they form concepts? Okay, so carrying on, the captain always goes down with the ship. Who's the
I'm not
captain
the
on a life?
captain.
Who's the captain on a life raft? Not
Greg
me.
is. Greg is the captain.
Okay, sorry, Greg. You're the captain. You're going down with the boat. You're saving me and Michael. Okay, so any coercive redistribution violates rights. But Dewey would ask whether a social order that leaves millions without the effective capacity to exercise their intelligence and make genuine choices is itself a violation of the conditions that make rational agency possible, and whether your framework can even recognize that kind of unfreedom.
Yeah. This is just hocus pocus. Somebody just said something that I was with something right now that I don't remember what they said, but it would have fit perfectly to describe this. First of all, it's not the case. So he wants to ask about what if reality was different than it were, then would we still have rights? So in a free society, that the condition he describes doesn't happen. But he's saying, but what if it does? Well, what if I wasn't a human being? What if I could fly? What if I could transport myself as if I were on Star Trek from place to place? I mean, you could ask an abundance of different questions. And of course, if all these things were different, then rights would be different. But the fact of the matter is that human beings are what they are, and the necessary conditions for our thriving are freedom. So he's just wrong on that. And I really don't know what more to say about it. So you have to engage his phony hypothetical. If that's what people would say. That's what Claude will likely say when you have it analyzed. Oh, but you didn't address it, because I don't accept it. I don't even accept it as a possibility. But if you're saying in a free society where rights matter, that if there are people who are suffering, nobody's going to stop John Dewey from helping them if he chooses to. What I'm saying is, if John Dewey puts a gun in my face to rob me so he can help those people, I'm morally justified in taking him out.
So, but this whole idea, a social order that leaves millions without the effective capacity to exercise their intelligence and make genuine choices, this is also this like a Karl Marx-ish idea. We're being like that there's a whole class of people that are being exploited, and that you can't make genuine like trade agreements because you are a wage slave and you've got no choice.
Yeah, there's all types of BS assumptions cooked into the question.
Yes.
So,
moving on to Mises. So he was utilitarian in his foundations. He grounded the case for capitalism and individual liberty in praxeology. I don't like these words.
Nobody cares. Move on to the question.
And the demonstration that free markets best serve human welfare, not in natural rights. He would ask Rand, if a rigorous economic science already vindicates laissez-faire, why introduce a metaphysical rights foundation that is epistemologically vulnerable and unnecessary? Doesn't the natural rights move actually weaken the case for capitalism by tethering it to contestable moral premises?
No, well, first of all, it's not an epistemologically weak foundation, so that's wrong right off the bat. So let's kick that out. Secondly, the standards do matter, and this is why Mises ends up justifying certain welfare programs, because he doesn't ultimately say this is the way it should be. What he says is this is what most people prefer, and this is how to get it. Right? So that doesn't ground you, and it also opens the door for an abundance of problems if you can show, for instance, well, in this one situation here, we could pass a law that would actually lead to the greater happiness of more people, right? So then you're going to justify it. Like I believe there's things he was for that I can't remember right off the bat. You can Google it, Persephone. But he wasn't 100% opposed to all aspects of a welfare state and all redistributionist things of that nature. And that's what ends up happening. And that leads you to a slippery slope. Akira Felix says he justified the draft. That might be one example.
Okay. He argued that interpersonal utility comparisons are impossible, making any cardinal claim about what serves human flourishing scientifically illegitimate. If you cannot aggregate or compare welfare...
No, that's not the question. I know all that, but that's not what I want you to ask. I'm asking you, what type of government interventions did he justify?
I didn't even hear you ask that.
Well, if you paid attention to what I asked, you'd know.
Okay, well, you talk.
I'm going to send a nice little chat here.
So, Mr. Deagle wants to know, what do you think about the libertarian rights based on the avoidance of conflict?
My critique of the libertarian idea of rights stands that they don't tie it to a broader ethical theory. It stands alone, floating in the air, not tethered to anything. They start with things like self-ownership or non-aggression. All ethical concepts that require an ethical theory, they don't have one, therefore it loses. Don't take deep breaths just because you have cat ears on. Go ahead and ask.
I'll just breathe, like, I'll just hyperventilate, shall I?
All right. What did he justify?
Some public goods might genuinely require state provision if markets couldn't supply them. He was skeptical that this applied broadly, but he didn't rule it out categorically. He accepted a monetary framework, preferring a gold standard. Okay.
The point is he would justify some. So now, if Rand is right, back to your question, why do you need individual rights? Well, let's just for this thing right here, assume Rand is right. Then Mises is unjustified in having the government make these provisions. Therefore, his thing would lead to an unjust result, whereas Rand's wouldn't. So that's why.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we got?
So he argued that interpersonal utility comparisons are impossible, making any cardinal claim about what serves human flourishing scientifically illegitimate. If you cannot aggregate or compare welfare across persons, how do you establish that the rights respecting social order is objectively superior for human life rather than simply asserting it?
So, first of all, Mises assumes subjective value. That's the first thing we have to say. So I would disagree with that. Secondly, even assuming, well, not assuming, it's true that different people prefer different things and that what's good for one person isn't necessarily good for another, et cetera, et cetera. If you respect individual rights, then human beings get to make their own choices. And they get to choose the things that are going to lead to their flourishing. Nobody is imposing it on them. So while you couldn't make the interpersonal calculation, we would know that human beings are making decisions based on their best judgment, and they're free to do so to flourish as they're able.
So Akira says, not going to lie, I feel dumber by listening to some of these arguments. That's kind of how I feel. So now we're moving on to Green. So he distinguished negative freedom, the absence of external restraint, from positive freedom, the actual power to realize one's rational capacities. A starving man is free from legal coercion but lacks the real conditions of self-development. Doesn't Rand's framework, by recognizing only the former, mistake the form of freedom for its substance?
It doesn't make any mistake. It actually identifies what freedom is. Freedom does not mean flourishing. Freedom provides the conditions necessary for flourishing. These guys, like Dewey and Hill Green, what they do is they take the condition of flourishing and they say that's actual freedom. They're not the same thing.
Go into more detail.
Well, assuming that nobody coerces you, me, or Christopher Smith, and we're in society, you may very well choose to pursue a lot of money and a lot of success, and you make it where I choose to drink booze and Pepto-Bismol, right, to soothe my stomach, and Christopher Smith just wants to earn a job, work a 9-to-5 job. We're all equally free. We're going to flourish to vastly different degrees. So if I end up starving, he ends up, barely making it, and you end up flourishing to the highest degree, do we say you are freer? No, we say you've made the better use of your freedom, of course. But freedom is the absence of coercion. It doesn't entail a result, and that's what he seems to be implying.
So Mr. Deagle says, I meant the liquid Zulu theory of rights, where he bases them on objectivist ethics, but starts with conflict.
I would say that I don't see how he bases his theory of rights on the objectivist ethics. I know that's what he says, but I haven't seen it, and I've debated him, I think, 5 times. I've read an abundance of his stuff. If he has done so since, or if he did it somewhere else, then, I'm open to it. But I haven't seen where he ties it to the objectivist ethics.
A lot of people define freedom as doing whatever you want. A lot of people also do a lot of very stupid other things.
Yes.
So a lot of people is not a good. A lot of people do it is not a good.
No, I think he's criticizing those people. But go ahead.
That's fine.
Do you have another question?
Yes. Green argued that rights are social recognitions. A lot of people argue that. A right is only real insofar as the community acknowledges it.
Look at this. Look at what just happened here. Come here. Come on. Look, she came in and just hopped up.
I get told to remove my dogs, and this is what he does. Can you believe it? And he's also being mean to me on the Twitch chat. Everybody should go follow on Twitch so that they can see how Michael is mean to me on the Twitch chat. Okay, so Green and a bunch of other people argue that rights are social recognitions. They're only rights in so far as the community acknowledges them as serving a common good of persons as self-realizing agents.
Okay.
On this,
hold on. Let me say this. What would there be to acknowledge if there was no such thing?
nothing.
Okay. Of course, you only know about rights in a social set of circumstances. That's the only place they're applicable. But if you're saying they're going to acknowledge something, well, what are they acknowledging? He's arguing that they're fictitious creations, and I disagree.
I mean, the thing is that one of the reasons that...
Hold on 1 second. Keep talking. Get out.
Mark Pellegrino established the dog precedence. That's true. I think we should see more of Michael's dogs. I don't know.
Okay.
Also, Akira Felix, yes, my dogs are South African, but that makes them superior.
South Africa is not even a real country. Okay, let's get on to...
So the reason that this is so challenging for me, right, is because when I read all of these questions and I read the arguments and, you know, I read how a lot of this is based on utilitarianism, to me, it just seems immediately wrong. Immediately I'm judging the foundation of your argument because to me, utilitarianism does not make sense. Yeah. There are too many ways in which utilitarianism is damaging. And so all of these questions to me are really difficult because I'm like, it starts in a faulty place. Therefore, the question can't really be any good. Anyway, So, rights are social recognitions. They're only real insofar as a community acknowledging them as serving the common good of persons self-realizing good of persons as self-realizing agents. On this view, an isolated individual cannot bear rights. How does Rand respond to the claim that even her account of individual rights presupposes a social order whose legitimacy she cannot derive from individual nature alone?
I don't think that makes any sense. I don't know. You have to ask it again because it seemed incoherent to me.
Well, I'm glad. Just these are the questions that you sent me.
No. I know, but I want to hear it again. Ask the question.
Okay,
I didn't
I'm gonna
read them first. I just sent them.
So I also rephrased them. Rights only mean something when a community recognizes and upholds them. An isolated
Okay, stop. Not true. Rights
Yes.
mean something whether they're recognized or not.
Well, not
Full
according
stop.
to not according to
let
Hill
me
Green.
no, but I'm disagreeing with him. Rights
Yeah.
mean something whether the community recognizes them or not. Now, they're not secure if people don't recognize them, of course. That's obvious. But that's why you need a theory of rights. That's why you need people to adopt them so that they will be secure. Okay, now go.
Scroll. So an isolated individual can't hold rights in any practical sense.
Okay, so what? That's why we form governments.
How does Rand derive legitimate rights from individual nature alone without already depending on the social order she's trying to justify?
Because you derive individual rights based on human nature and human requirements, and you, based on that, you say this is the type of social order that we need.
I mean, yeah. Mr. Deagle says, do you think there are rights on a desert island with 5 people on it?
So, yes, I do. But, Mr. Deagle, I want to throw you off a desert island right now for asking the question. Because I addressed this substantially already in my critique of, in my show where I talked about why I don't call myself an objectivist. So, yes, I do think that you have rights on a desert island because I still have the moral freedom of action. I still need morality. And if somebody physically tries to interfere with me, I am morally just in defending myself, i.e., I have a right to defend myself. So, yes, I do think so. But Leonard Peikoff would disagree according to Opar. And I also just did a wicked debate with a guy named the Rational Capitalist on this very topic, on the rational egoist.
The rational egoist, the rational capitalist, the rational alternative. We're all rational here.
We are.
So, just because rights need like a government or need laws to protect them doesn't mean that the laws
But they don't.
create
Yeah.
them.
But first of all, they don't need, like, if I was on an island with 5 people, I don't need a government to defend myself. Alone, or I can join 4 people and we defend ourselves against the 5th. I mean, you could call that a government, I suppose. The optimal case for rights protection in a large society is to have a government.
But my point still stands. Just because the law protects the right doesn't mean that the law creates the right.
Right. Now, I'm going to go and try to find this so I can get it for Mr. Deagle because Mr. Deagle is stressing me out. No, I'm only kidding.
Christopher Smith says, my show, The Irrational Hedonist, is not getting off the ground. I lack focus.
Can you, Persephone, by the way, change the banner on the show also? It says Capitalist Corner on top.
I know. I'm getting there.
Okay, I'm just asking.
So, Christopher Smith, it's really funny. Me and my friend wanted to start, like a while ago, we wanted to start a TikTok channel called Two Disgusting Hedonists because we thought it would be funny. Mr. Deagle also found it, so you can stop whatever you're doing.
Oh, okay.
So that was all the questions that I had.
Awesome.
If anybody has any questions, quickly, Michael is happy to answer them, and I'm happy to sit here as moral support.
Thank you for the moral support. There doesn't seem to be any questions.
You have to give people more than 3 seconds in order
It's
to
been
type a
plenty of
question.
time. They've had an hour and a half.
Final questions. You have a minute. You have a minute, everybody. Michael, I'm sure there's something you can say to
I will. I
Last
hope that
minute.
everybody enjoyed this, and I hope that you enjoy these Saturday shows going forward. They will be more philosophically inclined as opposed to the current events that we. Did I not just say it was Saturday?
I have no idea what he's talking about. I heard
Okay.
Saturday.
I might have said Sunday. If I did, I'm sorry. But either way, we're going to be doing this on a regular basis with more philosophically inclined shows. So I really hope that you will tune in and really enjoy these. We also have crime, corrections, and culture every day at 2:30 p.m. No, I'm sorry, 3 times a week at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We do Everyday Ethics every day at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, our flagship show every day, noon Eastern Time, The Capitalist Corner. Maribins wants to know, why aren't there more subscribers to her Inductive History of Biology channel? Indeed, check out Megan. Megan is wonderful, and Megan is welcome on The Rational Egoist anytime. She just has to pitch an idea to me, and I'll bring her on, and she can promote whatever she likes. And Megan, I hope married life is treating you well. All right, nobody came with any questions, and that's good for me because I have a birthday party to attend at 5:30 tonight, but still.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for your questions and comments. Persephone, tell them where to go, and not in a mean way.
Please go follow us on Twitch. Please visit the website, thecapitalistcorner.org. Please go to the YouTube membership sections and perhaps take a look at the membership options. Please find us on Spotify, The Capitalist Corner, Everyday Ethics and Crime Corrections and Culture. And again, please follow us on Twitch. And if you aren't following on YouTube, please do that. And please like and subscribe and share. Hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever the channel goes live.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, in honor of the great Mark Pellegrino. Until Monday, please check your premises.